Hear your papers.
It's all right.
Hi,
I got
everybody. Welcome to our new episode. And today we are doing our new episode on continuing with I'm My Own Ancestor. But before we get to that, let me tell you a little bit about the IMS. So the Institute of Metaphysical Science was established in 1959 as the Margaret Laird Foundation. We're a nonprofit charitable trust, researching, exploring, living, and teaching the science of being and the causal nature of consciousness. The website is www.scientificmetaphysics.org. In today's episode, we're going to be looking further at the booklet by Margaret Laird, which was an address that she gave entitled I Am My Own Ancestor. So that is what we are going to be referencing as the main thing we're going to be exploring. And that's what this episode is all about. So to kick us off, when we were talking about I am my own ancestor, and I thought, that people might not actually understand what we're talking about when we say that. And what we started to look at is, well, what pre-exists this, right? What pre-exists Kim? And there's a divinity, there's a being, there's consciousness, right? And that gives rise to everything that we can see, hear, feel, taste, and touch. And to that end, that's what we're saying about ancestor. Who I am is bigger than what I see in the mirror, right? So that's the ancestor that we're talking about, is being, the God idea, what gives rise to that which we see, hear, feel, taste, touch. Anything you want to add about that?
Well, yeah.
Well, I know we're going to be talking about the whole thing, but anything just preliminary, because what I do have what Mrs. Laird wrote, which she said the goal or end, perfection, is man growing the means or media for his, I would say his/her, self-fulfillment. Being man is the means for gaining the end.
Yeah. It is the end coming to view, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing is, we have this from the human condition point of view. We have it as a given that every individual is a baby that is formed by parents, all observable. And then we endow that baby with whatever good or bad qualities the parents had, or the grandparents, or the aunts and uncles. And that must be what makes the guy the way he is. And science comes along and says, that whole language phenomenon, the whole paradox world, is a point of view. And it's a point of view you hold with regard to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's true, a point of view is not generative. It's not causative. It's not my source. So there's something else going on. What could that be?
Yeah.
So you see, over generations and generations of philosophy and religion and research and development and all the rest of it, Mary Baker Eddy came up with a whole new view. And so she thought all of the qualities that we attribute to a perfect being that we call God, all of those qualities are identified as beyond the human behavior of individuals. And so, in working with that idea, she began to see that that idea of perfection present is actually, I want to say the word progenitor, but I mean precedes, comes before anything else. And that must be the causative thing that has everything occur. And in that spirit, of course, Shakespeare said there's a divinity that shapes our ends.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than there are parents that shape my ends, what happens when I say there's a divinity that shapes my end? And it opens up a whole new, a Pandora's box, if you will, of all that goes with whatever the source is. If that's the thing that is responsible or influential or accountable for my being, then it's something entirely different than my mother and my father and my grandmother and my grandfather and all that stuff.
Right.
So I can see that we have the language of something coming before, but not the fact.
Right.
Because there are times when you're nothing like either one of your parents or your grandparents. How did that happen? So I'm looking and I see, well, all right, if there's a divinity that shapes my ends, I need to be focused in on the qualities of that divinity if I want to grow myself legitimately, as it were.
Right. And be present to that which is real.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. We've got a comment by Sandy Jackson. And she says, since we are infinity being, there is no end, right?
Right. And no beginning.
Yep.
You don't have a beginning, middle, and end like the human picture portrays.
Right.
You've always lived. Life is eternal. What are we talking about? We say that. We hear it a lot.
Right. That's right. And I would say that science requires reason, curiosity, and provability to even begin to establish the facts that free each one of us from a role of like victim, something, or being automatic in our living, and inherent in human behavior. So anything that distinguishes that, what really gives rise to who we are.
Yeah. And when we think about these things, it sounds like a philosophical discussion, which it largely is, until you start living it differently. The only time it becomes a fact in your life is when you live it, not when you discuss it.
Right.
So it's up to each one who their ancestor is.
Yeah.
As far as their experience is concerned, the fact of their ancestor doesn't shift, but the way they live themselves does.
Right. So just letting everybody know, that's the precursor. That's us getting into this whole conversation. And that's the booklet by Margaret Laird, I Am My Own Ancestor. And you can get that right out at the IMS website at scientificmetaphysics.org. So, any rate, so I just want to say that if you love what we're talking about, you can do a heart or a like, thumbs up, and please send your comments over just like Sandy did. We would love to engage with those. Okay, so on we go. Now, should we dive into the quotes?
Sure.
Okay. So the first quote is on page 24 of I Am My Own Ancestor, where Margaret Laird wrote, man, like God, must be defined in terms of being and living. Any other definition than living as thinking for either God or man is mere interpretation and is neither God nor man. So let's break this down a little bit, because I think it sounded a lot like double talk when I was doing that, when I was reading that quote. So man like God must be defined. Okay, I get that part. In terms of being, living.
Yeah, what's the being of God?
Showing up, consciousness.
Yeah, consciousness is a good one. Mary Baker Eddy, just for the sake of the people who have studied that branch of metaphysical science, gave us 7 synonyms for the God idea. Okay. So we see that truth and life and love and soul and spirit and principle and mind are all definitions of the God idea, every one of them. So when I think to myself, what are the things that define my being? Then I'm really interested in Mrs. Eddy's presentation that man really occurs as a reflection of the action of the God idea.
Yeah.
So mind knowing, mind thinking, mind expressing reflectively has man occur.
Right. So then she goes on. That was very well done. I get that. So then she goes on in this quote. Mrs. Laird says, any other definition than living as thinking for either God or man is mere interpretation.
Yep.
So any other definition than living as thinking.
See, we can philosophize or interpret all we want, but the thing that makes a difference in our living is who we're being, how we're expressing ourselves, how we're governing our everyday experience.
Okay.
If I come from an idea of joy and freedom and purity, it's different than trying to describe a personal view or an interpretation of joy.
Right.
If it doesn't look like that, it's not joy. You know, joy has many, many faces, as it were, many hats it wears.
Right.
And joy for one is not necessarily joy for another from the human point of view. So just knowing that joy constitutes man, Margaret used to say, hey, you're joyous whether you know it or not.
Right.
When you get in tune with your joy, you're in good shape.
Right. And then I remember another comment too about someone who wanted to be healed or was looking for a healing, and her response, and I don't know the whole story, but this is what I remember of it, which is, well, I don't know, you may be dragging your foot behind you the rest of your life, but let's be a scientist after all.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's not about that. So anyways,
well,
and any other.
It is about that in a way, because what that's saying, what Mrs. Laird was implying, if you're going to be a two-legged animal from start to finish, you are going to be dragging one foot after the other and wondering what it's all about.
Yeah.
And where did my joy go?
Right.
And I shouldn't be doing it this way. Must be a better way.
Right. So she says any other definition than living as thinking for either God or man is mere interpretation and neither God nor man.
That's right.
So you're missed the boat if that's where you come from. Like that this is the primary thing.
Yeah, something hasn't looked like that.
Right. So what?
But it isn't something I can observe.
Yeah.
It's something I can intuit from principles that I know.
Right.
But the only time I know for sure that it's true is when it makes a difference in my behavior from one moment to the next.
Yeah. So, okay. So then we go on to say how Mary Baker Eddy would say the same idea in Science and Health on page 475, starting on line 13, where she wrote, man is the generic term for all that reflects God's image and likeness, the conscious identity of being, in which man is the reflection of God or mind, that which has not a single quality underived from deity. So it's basically saying the God idea constitutes who we are, and that which we feel, hear, see, taste, touch, the whole gamut.
Yeah, so in a way, you have to look at how you hold the word man. Mm-hmm. If you're thinking man is a guy standing on the street corner, you're not talking about the man that is the reflection of the God idea. And yet, you know, the way words are, there wouldn't be any man standing on the street corner if God were not present reflectively right there, right that moment.
Right.
So it's all one thing going on, seen in the eyes of science.
Okay. Very good. All right. And then also in Margaret Laird's 1972 seminar, which we have on CDs and MP3s, she says on that seminar, my body is the visible language identifying one aspect of myself, my individual conscious thought.
Yeah, and that kind of ties in with Mrs. Eddy's statement saying conscious thought alias body.
Yes. Yeah, very
So
cool.
my conscious thought gives me the body that I have, looking at calling itself Betty.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then in your book, Mind is the Athlete, you wrote on page 74, being self-expresses in and as form, action, and sensory expression, as language, or probably as any sensory expression. That's a typo. As language, language occurs as a view or perception of reality, whatever being is being.
Yeah.
So being self-expresses in and as form, action, and any sensory expression. Anything you can see, hear, feel, taste, touch, any circumstance that you may experience, and whatever that is all point of view of the one divinity present.
Yeah, and you need to emphasize that language, what you see, feel, hear, taste, touch. That's your interpretation of the reality present.
Right.
So you live it as you're able to live it, as your perception allows you to live it. But that's the fact you're living. You're not living the Betty as a fact, if I can put it that way, but the idea of being itself being, reflective of perfection, of joy, of freedom, of life, etc., reflective of the God idea. That's being my own ancestor. And it gives up on claiming that Betty happened some other way. I just have to let it go. That's a belief system in the human condition, not a fact of being.
Okay. It's
Does
just
that
the
make
way well, I would say it's the way it looks is not the way it is.
good?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So then in I Am My Own Ancestor on page 25, Mrs. Laird wrote, since man is conscious identity or reflection, the way to be man is to consciously identify mind, the God idea, with and as your awareness, which is yourself. This is the being that you are.
Yeah. And notice that she talked about your awareness, which is yourself. Thinking is thinging.
Okay.
There wouldn't be any Betty without any thinking, thinging Betty.
Okay. Form, is that form follows function?
Yep.
Okay. And then in Science and Health, Mary Baker Eddy says it this way on page 516, starting on line 5. Man, the compound idea of infinite spirit, the spiritual image and likeness of God, the full representation of mind. That really does give you this sense of expanse, of all. Just that statement, when you look at it, gives you that sense of all.
Yeah, it releases you from the confinement of being a two-legged animal trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting. Okay. And then the way you say it on page 76 in your book, Mind is the Athlete, is everything that shows up in your world is perfection functioning, giving you an access to yourself, the only way that you can see it at that moment.
Yeah. And I capitalized the word self because I'm not talking about the yourself Betty. I'm talking about self, divine being.
Yeah.
Source.
Yeah. And that would be that I have a point of view, whatever's going on in my circumstantial reality that I'm in my human experience is a point of view. It's the
Mhm.
only way I can see whatever it is I need to see in that moment. It's the only view I've got of the one reality present.
Yeah, and what generates some dissension in our experience of living is when we think our point of view is the same as everyone else's.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't they see it? I see it very clear to me,
Right.
you know.
Right.
Uh, when we think that way, that's what we're doing. We're assuming that every point of view is the same as our point of view.
Yeah.
And that's never the case.
Right.
There is no duplicate from my point of view. So I might as well give up on expecting anyone to have that view. And even when it looks like they do, there's a perceptual difference in how they define every word they say from
Yeah.
my definition. So,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
we're all unique, in other words.
Yeah. And there's and this is also can speak to self-discovering. If the way life shows up is being a reflection of the God idea showing up and presencing itself, then I could be looking at that as just infinite self-discovery. My laboratory for self-discovering is my human living. Could I look at it that way?
Yep.
Okay.
Cool. And that's exactly what it is. You know, I am the world I walk through. I generate it as I go. I make it as I walk on. So what I'm always doing is discovering myself all the time,
right,
whether I like it or not.
right,
And when I identify it with the way it looks out there, I think, oh no, not me. Who did that?
right,
You know,
right,
if it's got a name of something I don't like, I think, no, sir, that's not me. But I got news for myself. There isn't anything going on outside of one infinite being.
right, right.
However I see it, the point of view, I can let that go anytime.
Yeah,
But the fact of the matter is, there's just one thing going on, and it's my being itself being, calling
yep,
itself Betty.
right. And that being is your ancestor.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Just wanted to
And the
reinforce the
dictionary,
title.
by the way, doesn't really give us the definition of ancestors that's
No.
very helpful, but you do get the sense that they're talking about whatever came before and had an influence over what's present now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Correct.
it's and it's in that flavor that Mrs. Eddy writes this book.
Right. No, Mrs. Laird. Mrs.
Mrs. Laird.
Eddy. Mrs. Laird
Right.
writes
I'm
the
sorry.
ancestor book. Mrs. Eddy writes the others. Okay. So on page 28, Margaret Laird wrote, "What is happening in the world is that individuality is being freed through science from the limitations of personal sense." So individuality is being freed through metaphysical science from the limitations of personal sense.
Yep.
And those would be the limitations. Whatever you think limits this.
Yeah,
Whatever
and
you think limits this.
it's not personal because you'll notice that when some great new discovery occurs in the world, it occurs 3 or 4 different times, different places with different people because
Right.
it's an idea. And an idea has no attachment
Right.
to person, places, and things, but an idea is always perceived individually.
Mm-hmm.
And it can happen anywhere at any time with any appearance.
Right.
So it's never personal, it's always individual.
Yeah. And Mary Baker Eddy in Science and Health on page 516 on line 4 and also on line 19 says, "The substance, life, intelligence, truth, and love, which constitute deity," those are some of the synonyms, "are reflected by his creation. Man, made in his likeness, possesses and reflects God's dominion."
Yep.
Again, all sort of powerful sort of statement there. And then and then we have unity of good, which is also Mary Baker Eddy on page 8, starting on line 5, said, "Everything is as real as you make it, and no more so. What you see, hear, feel is a mode of consciousness and can have no other reality than the sense you entertain of it."
Yeah. And by the way, humanly speaking, your point of view is your sense of reality. So when you have an argument with it, Mrs. Laird used to say you need to pay attention to your seeing.
Yep.
If I see myself as being opinionated and all that stuff, then I'm stuck.
Right.
But if I can see myself as being itself, being all,
Right.
infinite, omnipotent, omnipresent, that's what's sourcing what I call Betty. So I
Yep.
can leave Betty alone and relax into my being and have it made in the shade.
Right. And I would also say that Sandy also made a comment. She said, "When looking up ancestor, I found progenitor, which dialed down to source."
Excellent.
Yeah,
Yes.
very good. Okay, so now in Unity of Good, we just did that quote. And then in Mind as the Athlete on page 129, you wrote, "Being, my being, and your being, and all being is sourced by and constituted of consciousness, and therefore omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient in its scope and action." So bottom line, we're all, each of us, awesomely powerful.
Absolutely. And you're never helpless.
Yep.
There's no such thing as being without resources or being helpless or being hopeless. Whenever all of that stuff comes up, right away, it's clue number one that I'm playing around with Betty instead of reality.
Mm-hmm. Instead of being present to the divinity that has it all show up.
That's right. So
Right.
when I'm being myself, I'm living divinely conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right. Anything else you want to say about this subject? And next week we will be back, but we're going to switch the night. So the night is going to be
Tuesday.
Oh no. Next week we won't be doing a session. So we're going to be skipping next week, and the following week we're going to be on Tuesdays. So we're changing from Wednesdays to Tuesdays for the new episodes.
For several weeks because it's interrupted.
Yeah, and so that we're going to switch it to Tuesdays. And so that's when we'll be on, not next week. Next week you can catch up on the episodes we've already done. So you can go back and catch up. And then skipping a week, we'll be back in 2 weeks on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central. Okay. And with that, we don't have any more things.
No more comments?
No more comments. So that's it. That's it. So I am my own ancestor. And that's what that looks like. So that's our full expression of that. And we will see you next time with a whole new topic. So if there's something that you really want to hear, let us know. We're happy to incorporate it into our episodes. All righty. Until then, see you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.